Hi, my name is Zach Winning and I'm a big bourbon fan. There's a few things about bourbon I'd like to share with you, primarily what bourbon is, the history of bourbon, and my review and a couple tips about drinking bourbon. You might ask yourself, what is bourbon? Bourbon is a type of American whiskey. It is a barrel-aged distilled spirit made primarily from corn. It was first made and takes its name from what is now known as Bourbon County. Bourbon is special in that most countries, through laws and trade agreements, they say that bourbon can only be made in the United States, and usually it is made in the state of Kentucky. In the United States, legally, bourbon must be made from a grain mixture that is at least 51% corn, aged in new, charred oak barrels, distilled to no more than 160 U.S. proof, which is 80% alcohol by volume, entered into the barrel for aging at no more than 125 proof, which is 62.5% alcohol by volume, and finally, bottled, like other whiskeys, at 80 proof or more, which is 40% alcohol by volume. Additionally, bourbon that meets these legal requirements and has been aged for at least 2 years and contains no artificial coloring may be labeled as straight bourbon. An example of the labeling is seen here on this Wild Turkey bottle, Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. Many people don't know the process by which bourbon is made. To start out, grain, usually at least 70% corn, malted barley, and wheat, rye, or a mixture of both, is ground and mixed with water to create what's called mash. Oftentimes, some of the mash from a previous version is mixed in to the new version, and this is known as sour mash. Finally, special strains of yeast are added to the ground up grain mixture and water, and the mash ferments with the yeast transforming the sugars from the grains into alcohol. At the end of the fermentation process, the mash is distilled in either a pot or a column still into a clear spirit known as White Dog, White Lightning, and when made illegally, moonshine. The spirit is placed into new, charred, white oak barrels and racked into warehouses to finish. The barreling process provides a signature color and flavors associated with bourbon. Some of the flavors from the barrel are caramel, oak, and vanilla. After maturing for a minimum of 2 years, the bourbon is diluted to the proper proof, which means it's mixed with water, and then bottled. Now I'd like to share with you some of the more commonly available bourbons and give you an idea of what each of them costs. Less expensive bourbons can be bought for around $20 a bottle. Some examples of these are Jim Beam and the Jim Beam varieties, Wild Turkey and many of the common proofs such as 80 and 101 proof, and Evan Williams. Some of the more premium bourbons you can be purchased from around $30 to $70 per bottle. Some examples of these are Four Roses Bourbon, Knob Creek, Maker's Mark, and Woodford Reserve. In the higher end of the price range, more like $50 to $70, you can find some more premium bourbons. Some examples of these are in the little bottles, Baker's, Booker's, and Basil Hayden's, and in the large bottle I have a bigger bottle of Booker's bourbon. How to enjoy bourbon. If you were shooting bourbon, you were doing it wrong. And if you're mixing the premium bourbons with Coke, you're wasting your money. I love a good bourbon and Coke, with my favorite being an Evan Williams bourbon and Coke. Some well-known mixed drinks with bourbon besides the traditional bourbon and Coke are mint juleps, the Manhattan, and the Old Fashioned. My favorite bourbons to drink straight are Knob Creek and Woodford Reserve. I prefer them over ice with just a splash of water. The water cuts the strength of the alcohol a bit and makes the bourbon more palatable, bringing out the bourbon's flavors. When you are paying a decent price for a bottle, you should sip it and enjoy it. One bottle will last and can be enjoyed for a long time. Finally, when you go to pour your second, third, or fourth bourbon, use a fresh glass, or at least rinse your favorite bourbon glass out. Never use dirty ice. So that way you always get clean and fresh flavors from the bourbon. How to make a good bourbon and Coke. First, take a nice clean glass Add some ice. Take your bourbon of choice. In this case, I'm using Wild Turkey 101 proof. And pour a little over the ice. Not too much, because if it's too overpowering, the drink may not be as enjoyable. Next, take your Coke and pour it over it. The final step in making a bourbon and Coke is to sit down, sit back, and sip away. Here's my favorite way to enjoy bourbon. First, take a nice clean glass, then add a good amount of ice. Pick your favorite bourbon. In this case, I'm going to go with Knob Creek. Pour a little over the ice. After you've done that, add just a little bit of water. Now, sit back, enjoy, and sip away at that bourbon.